Good morning, and thank you for joining us. Happy St. Patrick's Day. You've tuned into our New Mexico Recovery Series. Our mission is to create awareness of opportunities and resources for businesses and communities. I am thrilled to have top representatives from the State Land Office participating in this webinar, including the Commissioner of Public Lands, Stephanie Garcia Richard. Thank you for registering and submitting your questions. A few questions have been selected to address at the end of the presentation. We will not be addressing any questions submitted during the webinar. However, the questions submitted will be forwarded to the panelists. I'll be recording the presentation and posting it on our YouTube channel. I'll also be sending a copy of the recording to everybody that has registered. So I'll go ahead and get started. All right. With all my New Mexico Recovery Series, I'd like to highlight the 7 disaster recovery coordinators. Each region has a regional disaster recovery coordinator, and if you'd like to reach out to your coordinator, all their contact information is listed on this slide. So I just want to give you a little teaser. Save the date and pencil in your calendar our next month's New Mexico Recovery Series. It's April 20th at 1 p.m. I have Mark Hayden, CPO and State Purchasing Agent Director for General Services Department, will be presenting. So the Governor's Bill, Senate Bill 39, was signed and will be effective on July 1st of 2022. This legislation creates preferences for Native American residents and veteran businesses and contractors. It is also will increase the preference for New Mexico resident businesses and contractors from 5% to 8%. So you'll be learning more about that on that webinar. So I want to take advantage of this time to highlight an open grant opportunity. The Outdoor Recreation Trails Plus grant, which has just opened applications on March 1st. They're accepting applications on a rolling basis for the remainder of the whole year. However, they encourage people to apply early. This grant funds shovel-ready outdoor rec infrastructure projects, and that could be anything from trail projects to shade structures at parks or for outdoor learning, boat launches. And so what shovel-ready means is they must be completed within 24 months. This year, there's 2 tiers that you can choose from to apply for. There's Tier 1 projects are aimed at local level projects with an award amount ranging from $25,000 to just shy of $100,000. So eligible applicants for Tier 1 are tribes, pueblos, nations, municipalities, counties, nonprofits, school districts, colleges, universities. So pretty much everybody except private businesses is the easier way to say it. There's Tier 2 will fund projects with a regional impact. And these are larger amounts that are ranging from $100,000 to $500,000. So all the entities that I mentioned earlier are eligible, however, with the exception of nonprofits. There is a match requirement for both tiers. And if you'd like to learn more, I would encourage you to go on the Outdoor Rec website, which is nmoutside.com, to find a program guide for the grant. And you can also sign up for their newsletter to get any updates on the grant, which includes they're going to be doing a grant Q&A and technical assistant webinars that are coming up. So stay tuned for that. And my colleague Felicia DePaula, Program Development Specialist, has another interview scheduled for the Rural Efficient Business Program. Les Combres Winery will be interviewed on the 24th at 11:30. So click on the link that's provided on the slide. I wish I could be there in person for that one, but they didn't ask me. Anyway, I'm sure most of you are aware of Economic Development's weekly resource wrap-up. It's our e-newsletter that has full of resources with articles and free webinars. We're also trying to expand our reach for the resources, so we're including a live stream. So every Monday, the department will stream a quick overview of our weekly resource wrap-up via Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter in under 15 minutes. So we feature a new guest every week. Just this past Monday, we featured Alyssa Renwick, project coordinator for Outdoor Rec, to discuss the program I just mentioned about that grant opportunity. So if you're one of the people that prefer to listen versus read our weekly email, just plan to stay tuned. It's, again, Mondays at noon. So with that, I'll transition over to the State Land Office team. We have Stephanie Garcia Richard, Commissioner of Public Lands. We've got Steve Varick, Assistant Commissioner, Commercial Resources. And we have Craig Johnson, Director of Outdoor Recreation. So I'll go ahead and pass the mic over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And you know, on this kind of dreary morning here in New Mexico, it is St. Patrick's Day, so some of us are wearing our green. And I do recognize that this webinar is being recorded and will be available later on, so this may not be as relevant once it's watched later. But I'm wondering if folks on the line with us today would join me in a brief moment of silence as we remember and our hearts go out to the families of the University of the Southwest golf team. They lost tragically 6 members of the golf team plus their coach just 2 days ago on a busy highway in Texas. And I'm wondering if we could just remember them for one moment. So if you'll join me, thank you. Thank you very much for that. You know, here at the Land Office, part of our job is bringing in money for higher ed institutions. And so college students are very, very near and dear to the work that we do on behalf of the beneficiaries. And we'll talk more about that as the webinar goes on. I wanted to, before we begin, thank the Economic Development Department for offering us this opportunity to highlight state trust land and all of the vast ways that we use state trust land, and hopefully will spark something in you around the trust land in your region, especially if you are representing a COG, a county, a municipality, a school district. We had 94 folks registered for this webinar, and man, it was geographically diverse, institutionally diverse. So I think there's going to be a little bit of everything for everyone on this webinar. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Steve Varick, who's going to talk mostly about our business leasing and also about our renewable energy, but then also our Director of Outdoor Recreation. So for the first time ever at the Land Office, we've established an office, and right now it is a, you know, very humble office of one, but essentially it's the drive of that office to focus on outdoor recreation on state land. Because we've got, as you know, such beautiful locations here. And so Craig is going to talk about that. But it is my privilege first to give you an overview of the State Land Office. So this is kind of our agenda that you see before you. I'm going to be providing the overview. I'll talk about the history of the Land Office, how we were developed, what our mission and purpose is. I'll give you some examples of leases that we have that probably you wouldn't off the top of your head think the Land Office does. And then I'm going to pass it over to Steve. He'll talk about economic development, business leases, and renewable. We'll pass it off to Craig, who will talk about outdoor recreation at the State Land Office. And then you all provided some great questions up front when you registered, and so we'll take some of those at the very end of the program. But please don't hesitate to reach out. We'll provide our contact information. Jennifer has also agreed to forward us any additional questions that come up, and we would love to engage in a dialogue with you around some of the topics that are mentioned today. So without further ado, Jen, if you will give me my very first slide, please. Thank you. So you can see from the information on this slide that we actually became an agency even before New Mexico became a state. And essentially a lot of the Western territories had the very similar procedure that you can read about on the slide, where there was not a tax base available, there was not the population available to pay for important government services like public schools, higher education, you know, hospitals. And so they established these land offices. They used the Public Land Survey System, PLSS, actually developed by Thomas Jefferson, to survey land into townships and ranges. And every township and range is made up of a 36 section parcel of land. And in that 36 section parcel of land, we were deeded sections 2, 16, 32, and 36 for state land office use. However, there was some land, as we all know, because we've had folks living in this area of the Southwest for millennia, there was some land that was already spoken for. People already either were living there, residing there, or owned that land. So when that occurred, Pueblos, indigenous communities, land grant communities, National Forest Service land, when those lands were already established, they gave us lands in lieu of Section 2, 1632 and 36. That equaled to a total of 13 million acres, both mineral estate and surface estate, 13 million acres. Now, over the years, some of that land has been sold off, various things, and so we're left with about 9 million acres surface land, and that is the land that we manage on behalf of our beneficiaries. This office, the last important thing about it is that it's headed up by a constitutional officer, a statewide elected official. That is myself. I have to run for this position and be chosen by you, the voters. And I have, the office is in terms. So I'm completing right now my first 4-year term, and I actually am running for re-election. So if the voters are to choose me again, I would have the privilege of serving another 4-year term, and then that's it. There are term limits on these statewide offices that came about back in the 80s, I believe. So that is kind of the background of how the land office came to be and what its primary mission is. That mission actually is written both in the Constitution and in state statute. So we are held to, making money for the beneficiaries by law. Next slide, please, Jennifer. So here you can kind of see two things. First, all of the state land that is designated for state land office is in blue. So if you look at the blue, that's the bulk of state land office. But you can also see the other sort of large swaths of land that are contiguous and take up a big space. So if you look down in the southern part, kind of southern central part of the state, for those of you who are down in Doña Ana and Sierra counties, you will see that big sort of pink, it almost looks like an arrowhead pointing downward. That is actually White Sands Missile Range. So that's a large swath of land there. The orange up in the northwest corner, that's a large swath of land there, is the Navajo Nation. So you see that there are large contiguous pieces of land. State Land Office does have some larger contiguous pieces of land as well. As you can see, that blue is State Land Office land. So that is our 9 million acres. It is the size of Connecticut and New Jersey put together. I mean, it's a significant land base that we manage. Okay, next slide, please. So how do we get our money and who does it go to is a question that we get very often. And we get our money in two ways. We either get it by non-renewable sources. Minerals is probably the most well-known of the non-renewable source of revenue. So we get money when our minerals are extracted from the earth. And then we get it in renewable forms. And renewable, obviously, renewable energy is a great example of renewable revenue. Agriculture use is also a good example. So when money comes into the land office, so if you look at the oval kind of on the left side of your screen, when money comes into the land office and it's non-renewable in nature, it comes in the form of royalties. And those royalties actually can't be spent by the land office. They don't go directly to the beneficiaries. Where they go is the Land Grant Permanent Fund. And the Land Grant Permanent Fund has had a lot of press lately because in November, we will vote on whether or not we would like an extra percentage of that money to go to early childhood education. The Land Grant Permanent Fund today, right now, is worth $36 billion. $36 billion. It's one of the largest funds of its kind in the world, actually. I think it's the second largest in this country. But we have that money invested all over the world. And the land office has inflows into that fund, but it also makes money from interest in the investments that are invested all over the world. The investments and the inflows are put into the land grant permanent fund, and then a portion of that fund, currently it's 5.8%, currently 5%, is then distributed to the beneficiaries. And we'll get to the beneficiaries in just one second, but that's the way that non-renewable revenue works. If money comes into the land office from renewable sources, so wind, solar, agriculture use, most of the business leases that you'll hear about today, outdoor recreation, all of those are renewable forms of revenue because the resource is not depleted. Those go down to the bottom of this chart. We call them rentals. Basically, it's just the lease money we get for use of your state land. And those go directly to beneficiaries. Now, we do take a little bit off the top for our operations, but the bulk of that money that we get in from all of the renewable sources I just told you about, we write a check directly to our beneficiaries. So beneficiaries get money in two ways, from the land grant permanent fund distributions and directly from our office in the form of a check monthly. Okay, next slide, please. And here they are, our beneficiaries. So the bulk of the land, and this is interesting because the land is actually assigned to beneficiaries. So the money that we make on 1 acre of land goes directly to the beneficiary assigned to it. We have 22 of them. The largest by far, the lion's share, is public schools. Most of the money we make, 90-some% of the money we make, goes directly to public schools through PED. But then we have these other beneficiaries as well that benefit from our hard work here at the land office. And no matter where you live in the state, probably you've got a beneficiary in your backyard. So for those of you in the Northeast, we have Colfax Miners Hospital. For those of you in Albuquerque, we have Carrie Tingley Hospital. For those of you in the Southeast, we have New Mexico Military Institute. For those of you in Alamogordo, we have New Mexico School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. We've got beneficiaries in every corner of the state. These beneficiaries were named out when the land office was first created, and they are actually listed by name in our state's constitution. We often get questions like, how can you add more beneficiaries? That would be a constitutional amendment to add more beneficiaries. But these are, most of the colleges, you'll notice, are beneficiaries as well. So here's the list. Next slide. So I get to tell you a little bit, and you would never guess some of these leases that we do on our 9 million acres of state land. I mean, we're kind of known as the oil and gas people. You know that we make $1 billion for public schools every year because we have about 2 million acres leased up in oil and gas development, but we do other things as well. And as we look to the future, we are wanting to not be so heavily reliant on the oil and gas revenue. We have appreciated it while it's been here, but for various reasons, climate reasons, economic reasons, the mere fact that oil and gas are not renewable sources, they are a depleted source. We are actually diversifying away from such a heavy reliance on oil and gas extraction and trying to make money in various number of ways. So here are some examples of our leases, okay? KOB TV has its tower on state land. So they pay us money to lease that land. That money goes to our beneficiaries. There is a US Post Office on state land in the Nageezi chapter of the Navajo Nation. Walmart in Silver City. I don't know if there's anyone on from Silver City, but your Walmart, every time you shop at your Walmart, you're benefiting public schools and universities, including Western. We have some affordable housing projects on state land. The most recent of those, there's one down in Las Cruces, but the most recent of those is in Albuquerque on East Central. We have refurbished one of those kind of empty, derelict, empty lots, and we are going to provide, with partnership with the city of Albuquerque, senior affordable housing. So that's kind of a twofer. That's a benefit, a social benefit of affordable housing, but the money from that lease goes to our beneficiaries. Spaceport America, who knew? Spaceport is on state land. Netflix, their brand new studio that they just built, or are going to build up in Mesa del Sol, the expansion studio, is on state land. We've got a number of elementary schools on state land, those in Gallup and McKinley County. We've got some landing strips, so there are airports and landing strips on state land. The Teen Center in Santa Fe, some drug treatment centers. There's one behavioral health center I know in, well, it'll come to me. But the Tucasa Treatment Center in Silver City is on state land. And so that's kind of the variety that you see of how we use state land. You'll hear a lot more in depth about that from Steve. But I will stay on because we're going to take questions at the end. And that concludes my portion of this presentation. I will pass it off to Steve Varick. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. Good morning, everybody. So in this passage, we'll talk about some of the business lease types that are most commonly used for economic development purposes. And the Commissioner mentioned there's a lot of really good examples out there. And I think one point that needs to be made would be, you saw the types of leases that state land issues, and essentially, even though we have certain leases that are called economic development, virtually every type of lease that we do has some economic value, to you and your community. So on a business lease side, we'll start out just talking about business leases, as we call them. There's about 1,100, and also rights of way, which is something many people never think about until you, let's say, need access for infrastructure, let's say for an economic development project, and we have more than 22,000 rights of way. So let's just start on short-term leases. They are the most common commercial lease that we do, and so for us, anything short-term is 5 years or less. Why is that important? Well, because if it's 5 years or less, it doesn't need to go out to bid. And so these types of, and we always associate value based on comparable pricing of other similar leases and so on, but it doesn't need to go through a bidding process essentially. And so it's a quicker process in order to get these. And so they're used for a whole bunch of purposes. Well pads for those of you in the oil and gas country, storage yards, distribution yards all over the state, electrical substations all over the state, just a lot of different varied uses for short-term leases, and they're pretty simple, straightforward to do. And we find that a lot of businesses that have these, even though they're 5 years, they just renew them every 5 years, and they've had them for generations, and that can be done, and it's done very commonly. We also have long-term commercial leases, and as you'd expect, those are anything over 5 years, right? So anything over 5 years, with the exception of a couple leases, municipal and economic development leases we'll talk about here in a moment, they need to go out to bid. Okay, that's the big step that would need to take place for anything over 5 years. But in all of these, we can be flexible and negotiate with you to try to meet the specific needs of the project you're working on. And so Commissioner mentioned, some of the longer term, Walmart, great example in Silver City, but down in Luna County near Deming is a TA truck stop is on state land. Luminaria, she mentioned, Union Pacific down near the border in Santa Teresa. And so there's a lot of good uses for long-term commercial leases. And frankly, the opportunity is there to do more with you and the economic development community. And then just a quick comment on rights of way. We're not going to focus on it in this presentation, but it's extremely important, particularly when you have projects that need water lines run in, or electrical lines, or roads. And because of the fact that such a large portion of the state's land is owned by state land office, you may need to come to state land office, and we're glad to work with you in terms of, or the companies you're working with in terms of granting those easements in order to put in that infrastructure. Typically, we do that for 35-year terms, and usually the money, the payment is paid up front, but there are exceptions to that as well. Next slide, please, Jennifer. Let's talk, you may be most interested specifically, because you're economic and community developers for the most part, in economic development leases. And so municipal leases and economic development leases are essentially the same thing. Okay, really important point. It just, we call them different things depending on the use. In both cases, we can go to a maximum of 40-year lease terms. Really important is, and the economic development community got behind us 2 years ago, The maximum lease term was 25 years on an economic development lease, and it was extended to 40, which opens up a whole bunch of opportunity for projects that you might be working on. And so let's start with municipal leases. And so municipal leases and economic development leases are issued to municipalities, counties, and school districts. Okay, really important point. So Commissioner mentioned the Netflix sublease. Well, we could not enter into a lease directly with Netflix, but we could enter into a lease with the city of Albuquerque and then do a sublease with Netflix. And so the key point is that it needs to go to governmental entities, including school districts. And she had mentioned some of those types of projects. And also Las Cruces got a bunch of water tanks that are out there, but there's a lot of municipal needs that are addressed through municipal needs, and we're glad to work with you on those as well. Key thing about municipal and economic development leases is that they're negotiated and they're not required to go out to public bid, right? So when you go out to public bid, as I think you're aware, typically entails just more time and more steps in the process. But these we negotiate directly with you. Often the Economic Development Agency is the intermediary between the municipality, county, and school district and a state land office and the client, like a Netflix, right? And so we can negotiate these directly with your team and not required to go out to bid. So we can move these through the process a little quicker, if you're in more of a hurry, to get it done. And so there's some really important economic development projects around the state that have been done with economic development leases. I think the commissioner mentioned, I think Spaceport America is one, but also if you have a business park, a lot of your communities, and we have state land in every county in the state now. Sometimes the best land in your community or county for a business park is state land. We are really interested in working with you. Commissioners made a really important goal of trying to address economic development needs in communities at the same time we're generating revenue, for the beneficiaries that she had mentioned. And so if you've got a project that you're interested in on state land, including business park, we're glad to work with you. So Pruitt Business Park up in McKinley County on the side of the Escalante generating station, right, which was closed. We're in the early stages of a new business park that will likely be 2 full sections of land, about 1,200 acres. So a lot of good examples. And as I look at it as as an economic developer over many years, it's like, gosh, there's a whole bunch of opportunities to do more of these, and if people only knew. So we're glad to, work with you and describe these. And so we will also be very flexible. Let's say you do a business park like Pruitt or down on the border somewhere. Let's say you do a business park. Well, we realized if you do a business park, the first few years, you're going to be doing master planning, you're going to be bringing infrastructure in, right? All that stuff, you're not making any money, you're just paying it out. And so we have done, and we are willing to do very flexible terms to try to keep the initial payment down low. And then in return, when you get tenants, let's say in your business park, in return, we'll take a percentage of those sublease payments, which is what we did with Netflix, the example the commissioner mentioned. So this is a great tool. It's underutilized. I think about every economic development organization has opportunity to use this, and we're glad to talk to you more specifically about it. Next slide, please. Let's shift over to renewable energy leases. And this has been an area of just tremendous, and I'm really not overstating that adjective, tremendous activity, right? And so we've had 16 wind and solar generation leases executed really since the commissioner came into office January 2019. And so we've got just a little over 3 years or so. And in that time, the amount of renewable power generation on state land has more than doubled. And frankly, we're expecting to triple everything that was done before 2019 by the end of June. And so a lot of great benefits to that. And of course, one of them is, as economic developers, you're judged a lot of times in terms of your ability to generate tax revenue as well. When you're making these massive investments, people are making these massive investments in wind and solar generation facilities. As you know, they're often hundreds of millions of dollars. And even if you're abating some of the property taxes through industrial revenue bonds, there's still a huge boost to the local tax base, right, to be able to pay for schools and other important services. And so we are really interested in this, and it's a brand new section for us. The commissioner had formed. Jeremy Lewis is our director. He's doing a tremendous job. And You know, sometimes we hear people are saying, well, it's either oil and gas or traditional power, or it's renewable. We're really seeing a melding of generation. And an example would be the very last lease we just executed was with Chevron. And it was in Eddy County, and they're actually using solar power to generate a lot of the power that they need for pumping oil. You know, so we're really seeing kind of a hybridization or a blending, etc. And we really are interested in these examples. These are long, so a renewable energy lease is a long-term bid lease, right? Remember how we mentioned anything over 5 years is typically long-term? Well, these average about 40 years. It varies, but about 40 years. So they're definitely long-term leases. It does require a public bidding process, but we've gotten better and better at moving through these processes, and we've got more experience. And so we're glad to work with you on it. And so where's the benefit for state land and those beneficiaries that the commissioner mentioned? Well, so obviously we're doing leases, right? We're not selling the land. We rarely sell land, but we lease the land for generation. And then usually in the first few years, again, because meteorological analysis being done, or cultural studies or biological studies, or planning of where the turbines or the panels are going to go, nobody's making any money. We recognize that. So the charges are not high in the first few years until the project gets operational. And then it really kicks in and we generate good money, because typically where we would get paid, it's a kind of a complicated formula, but in most cases on a per dollar per megawatt capacity, right? So, you know, average wind turbine these days may be 3 megawatts, right? And so we charge typically $4,000 per megawatt. So it's about $12,000 a year from just one turbine, right? 3,000 per megawatt generated from solar. So it can generate a lot of money for these beneficiaries. It can benefit communities, economies, right? And it's also really good for the environment, as you know. So some examples would be that we've done recently, and just a few would be Pattern Energy, which we've done leases with, but we've got a huge application from them right now for what would total 160,000 and be part of what we're told is the largest wind generation project in the U.S. And state land is only a portion of that. Buena Vista in Otero County, I think I saw somebody on the list from that economic development group, maybe Lori, and Wildcat Solar up in McKinley, just a few examples. So let me, next slide, please. We'll just kind of depict this on a couple maps here. So these are solar energy projects located on state trust land. The ones in red are active. The ones in black are applications. And some of these are really far along in the processes. And so I think, as you would expect, you see really 3 different clusters, right? I mean, the Southwest is known as the best generating region for solar, right? You can see a real strong cluster there from Las Cruces over to Lordsburg, essentially, right? But even in the Southeast, I mean, look at the Southeast, a lot of activity there in Eddy and Lee County, particularly, and again, increasing amount of that is tied to traditional energy production. And then there you see a third major cluster around Albuquerque as well, but you see stuff up in San Juan and County, up in Farmington, et cetera. And so there's a lot of activity here. Next slide. So here's a similar map for wind, but you see a different pattern, right? And so there's a lot, particularly the eastern side of the state, there's some great wind generation areas, right? We have extremely high average wind speeds, which is what the companies are looking for. But you see the main cluster there, kind of south of Moriarty in Torrance, Lincoln County, you see a major clustering, and it's going to be even more clustered if Pattern or others, you know, the ones that bid on these leases coming up, because they're going to be in that general area. But you see some stuff in the Northeast is a great area for generation, as you know, the eastern side as well. And then even in the Southwest, I mean, it's really kind of funny to us, but we are definitely seeing wind projects go into solar belt, like you see the 2 projects down there right around Deming, right? And we're seeing solar projects go to wind zones and wind projects go into solar zones. And so a lot of it depends on where the transmission lines are. So a lot of activity. And I think, let's see the next slide, and I'm going to go to the next slide, and we'll turn it over to Craig Johnson. Now, when you hear somebody who has a title, you know, Director of Outdoor Recreation, it's a little suspect in my mind, at least, but just kidding. So Commissioner formed this important new division, and Craig is just an avid outdoors person. He has been so many places the rest of us have never been to, and he also is extremely versatile. He had the job that I had before I did, and was great at that as well. So I'll turn over to Craig Johnson.
Well, thank you, Steve and Commissioner. Very kind, and appreciate the opportunities that Commissioner Garcia Richard has provided me. And what I'd like to talk to you all about today is give you some examples of what exists on state land right now, so you can get out this weekend and enjoy it. Give you a sample of what's coming up, and just a real quick flavor for what it's like to work with us at the State Land Office. So here on this first slide, you see the gorgeous Lower Gila box, pardon me. We worked with the Wilderness Alliance to create some signage out there so folks know how to safely access that area. Gorgeous place to go out and see some wildlife. Even coatis are out there. So it's a fantastic spot. White Peak and Loeras are next on the list. Commissioner Garcia Richard worked with our hunting communities to open up some camping opportunities on those areas. So again, even though these projects exist, we're still, actively managing them. Melrose Woods is a preeminent birding location in the eastern part of the state, where we've partnered with the Central New Mexico Audubon Society to create infrastructure so folks can go out there and enjoy that and rest on the benches that we've created and see the signage and whatnot. And Moon Mountain is another exciting one. There's a disc golf course created there in the community of Ruidoso, and that's such a wonderful amenity. That's really become part of the culture of that community, which is what we like to see in these state land office projects. So next slide, please. And there you see some signage that was installed on the upper left there at Melrose Woods. Again, a great place to see all kinds of birds, warblers, owls. That's the signage that the Audubon Society installed. And there's an owl. Next slide, please. And here on the left, this is some of the stuff that's coming up that we're very excited about. We've partnered with our beneficiaries in the case of Mods Canyon, which is a wonderful little area right by the Silver City the Walmart that Commissioner Garcia Richard mentioned in Silver City. We're planning a disc golf course there as well. As I mentioned, partnered with Western, and that's a lease. Steve mentioned leases and rights of ways and some of these different instruments and tools that we have at our disposal. The other image there is Continental Divide Trail. That's a right of way. That's an easement for a hiking trail, a very important trail, and we're working with the BLM and the wonderful Continental Divide Trail Coalition on that. Also mentioned here in this slide is Socorro Box, a bouldering area. Farmington Lake, a gorgeous underutilized area in the Northwest in my assessment, and a golden open space where you can get out and hike and bike. All three of these, we are working with our local communities very much in the lines of what Commissioner and Steve were talking about. It's the city of Socorro in the first instance, it's the city of Farmington in the second, and it's Sandoval County in the last instance. And we're working with them to put leases in place so that we can promote access to these areas that already exist, and then further plan them and eventually get some infrastructure and potentially facilities or whatever the community's needs out there. So those are up and coming, and stay tuned for more information on that. Next slide, please. And this is our contact information. I just really wanted quickly to say the processes are a little bit different for leases or easements, but if you have any questions about our properties or our processes or whatever, all three of us are available to answer any of that stuff. So please do not hesitate to reach out to me. That's what I'm here for, and I'd love to partner with you and make some real things happen out there. That's it for me.
All right, am I unmuted? All right. Wow, that's all I can say. This is, I learned so much already, each slide, and great presentation. So as I mentioned in the beginning, we're going to thank you for submitting your questions beforehand. We've selected a couple that we're going to talk about live here. So the first one is, does the state do land swaps with BLN land timelines as well?
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thanks to those who submitted questions ahead of time. A lot of these, I think, are going to be relevant for the general population of folks on with us, and then those who watch the recording later. So yes, the land office does, initiate this process of land transfer, swapping land, particularly with the BLM. That's kind of the easiest of the entities to do the exchanges with. Now, it's the federal government, so the timelines are fairly long. I'm going to give you an example of a BLM exchange that we have undertaken currently and started my very first year of this term, so 2019. And essentially it is to trade out of all of the state trust land parcels within the Oregon Mountains Desert Peaks National Park. Actually, it's not a national park, it's a monument. It's a monument. Okay. But essentially, when Congress draws these boundaries around federally protected lands like Oregon Mountains, the state land within those boundaries remains at the jurisdiction of the state land office. And the fear is that a commissioner could come along and develop the state land right in the middle of a protected wilderness or monument area. And so it's our goal to take those parcels, trade them out to the BLM, and exchange, because we don't just give things away at the land office. We have a fiduciary obligation to our beneficiaries. In exchange, we're going to be picking up some very lucrative land that we're going to be using for economic development on the back end. So we trade and swap the state trust land parcels to the BLM to be protected within the monument, and then we pick up additional land from them for economic development. For example, we're targeting land near the Santa Teresa port and border plex area, because that we have been told, and we hear, maybe there's folks on that know this, that is sort of the next burgeoning development for trade and border relations, and there's a lot of economic development potential there. So that land swap is about 120,000 acres, and we're already in our third year of that land swap. We probably have a good year or year and a half left to complete this land swap. So that's the timeline.
Great, thank you. So the next question is the process to get a trail permitted designated for ongoing public use.
So Craig's going to take this one, and Craig, if you would also talk about how Trails Plus funding can be used for this as well.
Absolutely, you bet. So I'm going to answer this question under the assumption that we're talking about just a single trail, linear right-of-way type of thing. We might also talk about a network of trails and open space that might be more amenable to a lease. But these details matter, and again, call me and we can talk this through and figure it out with Steve what approach we might use. We also have right of entry permits and special use permits, so there's a lot of tools in the toolbox. Back to the question. Starts with an application that can be found online. You can also read the rules that regarding leases and easements online. Then Steve's group will get it, assign an analyst, process it. They'll send it to the folks that I work with more in field, and they'll do a field inspection. Also part of that application process will be a cadastral survey, a meets and bounds description, so we know where it is, and a cultural resource survey. These are very, very important aspects, particularly the cultural resources require protection. And I just want to mention that the Trails Plus grant application that the Commissioner and Jennifer have mentioned can be used for those cadastral surveys and cultural surveys. We emphasize trail ready projects, of course, but we want to make sure that they are in fact ready and they're in the right spots and that people are aware of them. So that's probably more than you wanted, but feel free to call if it's not.
Thank you. Next question. What is being planned for the Las Vegas area, and how can people get involved to protect open spaces?
Okay, so I love this question because it marries Las Vegas and open space, and probably one of the most famous large contiguous open spaces that's available on state trust land, we talked about it earlier, is the White's Peak area. And not only has White's Peak, and it's partially in San Miguel County, partially in Mora County, partially in Colfax, not only has that area been used traditionally for traditional uses and for hunting purposes, but it's also now gotten a lot more attention just for avid outdoor folks. So a lot of hiking goes on there, folks camp in the White's Peak area. So we are actually undergoing, it's a landscape plan for that entire area to ensure that it remains protected, but it is accessible to folks not only who live in the area, but throughout New Mexico. If you have never been to White's Peak, it's one of the gems, and definitely the gem of the North. So I would very much encourage you to go and get out into Whites Peak. So what we will be doing there is a series of surveys around the transportation routes. Some of you may already know that the road access in Whites Peak has been a very contentious matter. We're wanting to make sure that those roads remain open, remain accessible, but also that there's not destruction of the natural beauty of that area. So we have a whole, we have money actually going towards this. We have a contract that's going out to bid right now for folks to design a transportation plan, to design a landscape management plan for that area. So that's just one example of the approaches we're taking to open space on state land throughout the state.
Good answer to that. Next question. How is the state looking to help tourist attractions with marketing to regain losses suffered during the pandemic?
And I think Craig's going to take this one, right, Craig? Talk about our partnership with NM
Sure.
True.
Absolutely, you bet. Yeah, it's been a great partnership, and Jennifer, I think you're probably aware of it too, where the NM True folks had a contractor that went out and took photos and filmed several locations on state trust land and other landowners and communities all across the state, and those have been posted to Google Maps, so you can go on and Sierra Grande, for example, or on our website there's a dozen different of these areas that we've highlighted and give you instructions how to go out there. Maybe half of those dozen have been featured by New Mexico True and the communities surrounding these locations to create these virtual tours, and people are driving online traffic to them, at least to explore them that way at the very least.
Yes, that's the new trend, is outdoor rec. Another question, do rural and land-based underserved communities, land grants, pueblos, etc., qualify for some of your opportunities?
So we are very happy to say that we are partnering directly with land grants and pueblos in supporting a lot of traditional use, but also even more sort of forward thinking, partnering on projects with folks. Because, like we said before, state land exists almost in every corner of the state. A lot of boundaries of pueblos, are adjacent to state land. Boundaries of land grants are adjacent to state land. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We have undergone a couple of land swaps with some of our indigenous communities here in the state, where we swap land back to pueblos that are, have an ancestral tie. And then again, like in the case of the BLM, we don't give things away for free. We receive land in return that we have identified that we would like to work on or develop or use for our beneficiaries. So that's a way that we've partnered with our pueblos. We are actually doing a lot of cultural protection and tribal engagement and consultation as well, but that's kind of more broad. With our land grants, they have been, the Land Grant Association has been here to the State Land Office to discuss partnerships. One of the very first things that came out of that first meeting was this idea to partner around fuel wood. Use of fuel wood is something that was in jeopardy for a while. There was, the national forests were actually shut down to acquisition of fuel wood. Fuel wood is available in almost every part of the state, and very oftentimes very close to our land grant communities. And so we have a number of partnerships, some in the East Mountains, some up in the north in Taos County, with our land grant communities, where they are able to come and gather fuel wood when we are doing an on-the-ground project. So those are just a couple of examples of ways that we partner with our land-based communities. That's a great question. Great way to phrase that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question. How many wind farms do we currently have throughout New Mexico, and where and how is the monies being used for our state?
We have currently, and I don't know how many wind farms total there are, but in terms of wind farms on state lands, there are 16 currently, and representing just about 100,000 acres. And so a lot of acres. And the other thing that's really interesting would be even though that's a lot of projects, a lot of acreage, we've got 15 applications for utility scale that is larger scale wind farms. So, and with way more acreage than that as well. So even more is yet to come, you know, in terms of wind generation. So where is it useful? The commissioner had mentioned that every acre that we own of the 9 million surface acres has an assigned beneficiary. You saw that list of beneficiaries. And the neat thing about a lot of renewable, as you're aware, would be most of it occurs in rural New Mexico, right? And it occurs all over the state. I mean, when I look at the projects we got in terms of wind and solar and applications, I mean, literally every quadrant of the state is covered. And so likely because of the fact that, as Commissioner mentioned, 90% of the revenues would go to K through 12 education. Probably the bulk is going there, but I was looking at a list the other day, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of other entities, you know, as well. A school for the blind, school for the deaf, Mexico Military Institute, UNM. There's a whole bunch of other beneficiaries that are the beneficiary of the revenues coming from the lands where those farms are located on. So it's pretty spread out, which is really pretty cool.
Great. So I think with that kind of concludes our webinar. We got some questions that came in, some really positive comments, so I'll make sure to forward it on. I want to thank the State Land Office panelists for your time this morning. Enthusiasm, I found it very informative and educational. I learned quite a bit myself. And I also want to thank everybody that's listening as well online. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.